This is the second of 3 live online events that have been happening this week. On Thursday the 25th, which was yesterday, we had our live readings event on Instagram, where 9 students shared some of their writings with us. On Saturday the 27th, tomorrow, we have our last event, sadly, from 1 p.m. BST. This will include a range of outputs, such as workshops, performances, and micro-lectures. Please come along, because it's going to be great. If you enjoy the excerpts from the films you see this evening, you can see some more of our cohort's work on our website, which is heylooksomethinghashappening.com. You can also hear more of us on the Hey Listen, Something is Happening podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Music, and Listen Notes. If you want to read some of the writing we've produced, you can order a copy of our publication, featuring writing from 80 students from our cohort and contributions from 10 of our tutors. This is available on the website for the price of postage and a transaction fee. If you're in the UK, this is only £2.36. Tonight, we're going to see 17 films from our fellow students. These films explore themes such as architectural discourses, performance, memory, the refugee crisis, AI, fake news, Saturday Night Fever, camel toe, and much more. We're going to be viewing these films via links to shared playlists in 4 groups of 4 to 5 films at a time, which we'll send in the chat. You should also be able to access a full programme of the event with the film descriptions in the Facebook event or as a PDF in the Zoom chat. So if you scroll up to the very top of the Zoom chat, you can see the programme. After each group, we'll hold a Q&A. We're going to try and keep these to 15 minutes so we can get through everything. Ask any questions, please don't be shy. If you're watching, you can send the questions in by the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. Also, if you're a panelist, someone who's submitted a film, all these lovely faces that you can see, you can just ask the questions live. We're expecting that this event would be around 3.5 hours long, could be shorter, movie marathon style. So grab a drink and some popcorn and get comfortable. The running order will be as follows. The first film would be Concrete Inequality by Ellie Davies, London's Lost Garden, a performance for Convoy's Walk by Jack Lowerson, Sweep Aside by Hohyun, Weaving Herstory by Medina Mukhayer. Then after these 4 films, we'll have a Q&A. The next 4 will be Crafting an Archive by Natalie Galvau, Rosemary for Remembrance by Isabella Jones, How to Be a Daddy by Marta Company, and The Fisherman's Inn by Zoe Frost. Then after these 4, we'll have a Q&A. The next 4 will be Exercises in Lying by Joe Lockwood, Toothbrush As, a film series by Emily Sharp, When I Walk Around My Home by Adina Grecu, The Digital Reading Workshop by Stan Bidston-Casey. Then at this point, we'll have another Q&A. The last 5 films that we'll have will be Spilling the Tea on COVID-19 by Megan Evans, What Is Our Duty to Nostalgia by Alfie Evans, The Devout Capitalist by Arianne, Bikes by Sarah Elwen, and last but not least, Have You Seen Me by Conant. After this, we'll have our very last Q&A and then we'll end. So I'll give you a few minutes just to get your popcorn, get drink, get yourself comfortable, and then we'll start.
Cool. I'm going to send a link to the first playlist in the chat now. So you can follow that link and then start. And then we'll sort of regroup back on here after we've watched those films. And this Zoom window will be running the whole time in the background, so you should just be able to click back on.
No, so the playlists are unlisted, so you can only access it via the link, just to protect people's videos. Okay, I hope everyone's comfortable and has drinks and popcorn and everything they need. If you'd like to click on the link and watch the first video, watch them all, and then when they're finished, you can come back here and then ask your questions. Enjoy.
If anyone has any questions, we can start now, or we can give it a few more minutes if people are still watching. I've got a question, so I can start. I guess they were all lovely films. I enjoyed them very much. I think I was wondering with Ellie, with your concrete, did you have a specific like ritual or routine for how you cleansed it, and like how much care went into like the actions you were using or the tools you were using?
I tried to time myself, and I tried to keep it as the same as I could in every single location. But in certain areas that I felt more comfortable. So in the National Theatre, I was sort of hiding behind a wall. So I spent quite a long time there because no one could see me. And the same in the Barbican. But in Robin Hood Gardens, all the flats looked down onto the little concrete sort of plinth I was stood on, and some little kids were shouting at me. So I did those actions a lot quicker because I felt like I shouldn't be there, like I was invading their space. So I tried to keep it as the same as possible, but yeah, it did vary.
That's interesting. Okay, so it was a little bit about like your visibility as well as the concrete, I suppose.
yeah, because I think the whole reason is to putting all the images on together, all the videos up together, and syncing them is to show that I'm doing exactly the same thing in each location. So I tried to keep it as the same as possible, but it didn't work out every single time.
Nice, lovely. Any more questions? Any other things people want to say?
I've got a question for Hohyun, but I know your mic's not working, so you can prepare your answer and then just type it in the chat. I wanted to know, how did you get access into the plastic recycling factory? Because that looks like a really cool place to be able to go. So yeah, just let us know how you did it in the chat.
I had a question for Jack, which is, your project was like a medium for protest, like through performance, and I was wondering what the discourse of that was, whether your voice is kind of being heard or if more people are getting involved with your performances.
Yeah, so the idea was with that, specifically with that film anyway, was that is a promotion for performance that can happen live in the site with members of the protest groups who have contributed to the research of that work. So it's one group in Deptford called Voice for Deptford who are campaigning to engage more of the public in that debate and trying to basically stop the planning proposals from going ahead. So they would be invited to be audience members and participants of that performance when it can happen. And then it would also kind of invite other members of the public from Deptford and work possibly in collaboration with a theatre group in the area as well. Yeah, does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, kind of following on from that as well, I suppose, is like, have the developers seen what you're doing? Have you kind of directly addressed them or sent it their way?
No, not at this point. No, the one of the outcomes I did do, as well as that film, was a full podcast radio play of the script that I wrote, and that is going on the website for the campaigners.
Oh, nice.
But no, there was no kind of direct I suppose intervention with the actual kind of developers at that stage, because they, well, for no other reason than they're sort of quite difficult to get hold of, really.
Yeah.
Not really at this point. There was no kind of direct contact to send to them, because they're constantly kind of changing who's sort of heading up the plans and stuff like that. So it's quite hard to integrate that. Yeah.
Are you planning any future gate crashing their site visits with your performances?
That could be interesting. Yeah. So one aspect of it was to
force it in front of them.
Filmed, like actually to sort of document the performance as it happens, and then that would be used as a thing to send to them. Like, it would be interesting to see if you sort of embed it onto the Convoys Properties website and sort of I suppose that then it enters another stage of my kind of initial research into guerrilla gardening and what that means. and
Yeah.
it's a very, very digital, temporal thing as well, which could be interesting.
Cool. Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice. We've got a lot of questions for Medina coming in, actually, from various different people. Meg Evans sent one in first that I'll read, and then we've got one from Emily, and then we've got one from Amelia in the chat. So I'll read Meg's first for Medina. And she says, your project was so personal. Did you feel like it was harder because of this? And do you feel like you personally have learned more about yourself, like the women in the workshops that you were talking about?
I guess it started from a personal space, but then as quickly as I could, I wanted to bring people in to work with other people. Because I didn't want it to be kind of like all about like that's just personally it's embarrassing, but then also for other people to get more voices in it just makes it richer. So I definitely tried to get people to work in it as fast as possible. And then later had the cringe moment when I put the presentation together and saw how much of it myself there was, because I guess a lot of the participation happened before COVID. So afterwards, I didn't get to bring as many women in for the presentation of some of the pieces as I'd like, because I'd like that to be a participatory part as well. But definitely learned more about myself. And from that angle, and I feel more grounded in being a designer from a different origin and not European and not trying to play to that market because of going on this journey, because that's a kind of discomfort that I had before. So, yeah.
That's brilliant. I think Emily's question was quite similar, and she said, has your relationship changed with your identity, considering the kind of discourse you had about sort of having two different cultures that were sort of part of you?
Yeah.
Is that?
Well, I'm still confused.
Do you think maybe that's okay? Like maybe it's okay to be confused?
Yeah, no, totally. Because it's not like with anything and anyone, we are not one or the other. We're going to be a mix, and there's going to be like recalibrations. There's going to be changes, and like to think of I feel like that's one of the blessings of being mixed race, because I'm not going to be told that I'm this or that. So there's this kind of middle ground where I can just like play whatever role I want to, without feeling the social pressure of like, oh, you should be doing this or that. So it's like, what?
For sure. Amelia's got a more sort of practically minded question, and she's saying, what are your hopes for your methods of exploring heritage in the future? I can imagine seeing this in schools with young children and teachers making together, which I second, actually. I can totally see that as a workshop for like kids in schools.
Yeah. Okay, short-term goals will be to take this workshop and take it to some more of the Sudanese diaspora to allow them the experience. And then long-term goals, number one is to help the women that are in the industry, because they've been overrun with the plastic industry, which has put them in a really disadvantaged position. So to be able to give them like techniques in which they could work more efficiently, so that they can even compete in the market, would be one of them. And then long term would be to start my own design course in Sudan. You know, just casual.
Oh, brilliant! Perfect.
But yeah, that's long term.
There's a question for Hohyun here sent in the chat, which maybe Hohyun, maybe you can reply to in the chat. Was this ever considered to be made a real campaign? It's got a very catchy name, and I can see it being done as a campaign to stop waste, creating different things in a creative manner by using public waste. Which I think I second. I really used the term like supplement object and coexisting with waste, and I thought that was really gorgeous. And then Jonathan Coles has sent in a question for Ellie. Given that you were engaging with concrete in similar spaces, were there any distinct ways that you were acting differently because of the space around you? So that's slightly off the back of the first question.
This one's quite hard because it's so similar to the first one. There's a couple of spaces that I had been to before and that I was familiar with. So I guess those spaces I was more comfortable and I knew where I was going and what I was doing. Because I didn't, when I felt alien in a space, so when I went to the Alexandra Road estate and Robin Hood Gardens, I think I did act differently because I was, especially because they're housing estates as well, I was more cautious of invading people's space, and being discreet and being quite quick. But apart from that, I don't think there's any real big differences between the way I acted at all the sites. But yeah, subtle differences.
I think to quickly go back to the question that Hannah asked Hohyun about how he got access to the factory, his reply was really cool and really clear. So the factory was a private property that belongs to iCoop, where they sell organic foods, and he made a contact with the company asking if he could use the lab and participate for their green project, and they said yes. So that sounds like a bit of like helping out each other and a bit of sort of a two-way street, which sounds lovely. And maybe for the last question before we move on to playlist 2, Meg Evans has a question for Ellie and Jack. Your projects look at different parts of the development. The pre-development with Jack and kind of like a memorial almost with Ellie. There's something here about the life of a space and its materials. Do you have anything to say about the celebration of life of these objects in ways very similar to the celebration of human life?
I'll let Ellie start with that.
Well, okay. I think so. So my spaces were responses to the people that live in the spaces and who work in the spaces. So I guess in terms of the celebration of human life, that is quite accurate, and I'm trying to represent these people that use these spaces. So I can't remember what the question was, but yeah. I hope that did that justice. Your turn, Jack.
Yeah, I guess with my work, it was kind of I had this constant question in my head about how I can sort of celebrate the history of this specific site, which had this kind of almost mythical status around this historic garden that used to be there. But the fact that it was very real and it was really there, kind of gave a celebration, I suppose, to the life that it once had and how that would have been created for the community and London more widely to have a healthier lifestyle, like as a very early form of early environmentalism. And then I suppose there was also questions about if this thing is resurrected some way through performance, like what does it become? What kind of conversations does that spark around who is it for, and what would they want their garden to be in the future, as well as what has it been, and what do people in Deptford now want to get out of gardening in an urban environment, I suppose. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
In a way, maybe like you are both brutal gardening in one sense, like brutalism, and another sense brutal planning development on a protected land.
Yeah, I think there's an inherent violence that's maybe kind of underweaves both mine and Ellie's projects in a sense. In terms of materiality, the materiality of kind of materials like concrete meets organic matter and real spaces that can be grotesque and very brutalist at the same time.
Perfect. Just before we move on, I'm going to read Hohyun's reply to Vlad's question, which is about, do you ever see this kind of becoming a public campaign? And then we can share the link to playlist number 2. So Hohyun said, it hasn't finished with the campaign, so it's, I guess, still an ongoing project. But yes, I considered to make it a campaign to describe waste as public. And also I meet several people in the public and children who played with it and used it. So it was not completely promoted in a campaign, but we had lots of communication with the public. So that sounds really promising, and it sounds like something that's still ongoing and is still very much a process, which I think is really, I think that's almost really important to grasp from a third year project, is a sense of longevity. So nice. So I'm gonna send the playlist to group number 2 now, and then we can all split off into YouTube again and watch that. So there it is. Hopefully everyone can see that. I'm gonna actually got 4 questions sent in from the Q&A. But first, hang on. A short disclaimer. First of all, Joe Lockwood, whose video was called Exercises in Lying, cannot be with us tonight. So any questions about that, she won't be able to answer. But also Jack Lowerson, who's a panelist here, was not exercising his own authentic opinions in that episode, but was sort of doing the opposite in offering opinions that were the opposite of his to test whether his companion could test to see if he was lying or not. So just like a disclaimer, those aren't his own opinions. We start with the questions. The first question is for Marta, actually. And she says, this is an anonymous attendee who says, Marta, lovely film, and I must agree. Why did you choose to look at dads rather than mums?
I think because I was trying to focus on the physical part of becoming somebody else, and I'm quite similar to my mom in terms of height and weight. So I thought that it would be funnier if I tried to become my dad, basically because we're very similar in a lot of sense, like eye color, genes, mannerism, but very, very different in terms of physicality, because my dad is a quite big guy. So
for sure.
Yeah, that was the main reason at the beginning, and then while the project started growing and progressing, it made more sense to be my dad than my mom.
Do you feel like you've grown closer to your dad in any way, or that your relationship's changed because of?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Me and my dad barely talk to each other before this. Well, once every 3 weeks or so. We have a few call-offs before the project, so it was really nice because now we are quite close and we talk to each other quite often, which has been a really nice bonding moment for us, which is something that I will always get out of this project no matter what, so that's nice.
That's lovely, yeah. That's really nice to have I think obviously projects like this do have tangible outcomes in that they have films and objects, but to also have something that's affected a relationship as well is super nice.
Yeah.
Lovely. We've got a question from Ella for Isabella. She says, Isabella, how did you film the underwater shots? They were beautiful. The whole film was beautiful. How do you think it's changed your perspective of your grandma and her condition? Or has it?
Hey, sure. So the underwater shots were filmed in a river in Wales. Because of lockdown, it had to be quite local. And it was with waders up to my chest and a GoPro. So because it was filmed upside down, the image kind of looked like it was mirroring the surface. So it all came from one of my grandmother's ideas of a teddy bear's picnic. I was asking her to talk about it, and she began to talk about this version where the teddy bears were thrown into the river and kind of floated away to this imagined realm. And for me, it really represents that kind of subconscious mixing of memories. And also the feeling that she gets in the morning. She gets a little bit muzzy and confused. And how it changed my perspective on my grandmother, it really allowed me to kind of visually, emotionally step into her reality. It's very different from mine, but at the same time, it was almost like a doorway into a different understanding. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. There are a few more questions for Isabella popping up, but I'm first of all going to ask Zoe a question from Monty, who asks, what emotions were you trying to evoke in the viewer, and what does the film mean to you as a filmmaker?
So emotions wise, I think when I was making it, the two sort of feelings I was focusing on was embarrassment and awkwardness, I think, that sort of comes with the film, and more specifically bodily embarrassment and awkwardness. But a lot of the film came from my own embodied experience of what I might have in the past, or what through conversations talked about being an awkward or uncomfortable bodily interaction or happening or whatever. But obviously those feelings of what is embarrassing or awkward are like different for everyone. So I guess there was like a feeling of slight uncomfortability, but also maybe it's not like, it's slightly playful, and but to the extent there wasn't like I want someone to feel really uncomfortable, because I was always aware that like, even though no matter what I intended or like where it came from, that doesn't mean that's how it would be received. Does that make sense? I don't think I've really answered that, but
that makes sense to me, certainly. Vlad's got a question that's actually quite similar, might fall under this kind of topic, and he says he's open about going, it's quite a personal question, so if you don't want to answer, that's totally fine. Okay. Your film's pretty different and stylized in quite a sort of alienating way in order to show how awkward bodily happenings can be, and if this is that something that you're experiencing, and how are you dealing with it?
As in, sorry, could you say the question again?
Yeah, of course. So he says, this is a pretty personal question, so if you don't feel like answering, that's fine. Since your film is pretty different and stylized in a very alienating way in order to show how awkward bodily happenings can be, is this something that you're experiencing? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely the like things like motifs and stuff in the film come from things that I might have felt awkward or embarrassed about. And I think the process was quite, especially due to lockdown, with me deciding that I just really wanted to make a film, and I felt that that was the best way to like try and understand these things that I wanted to explore. And then it became like me with a green screen in my own bedroom, and I was like, well, I have to do it, otherwise it won't exist like in the way that I wanted it to. So I definitely experienced through that process a lot of like embarrassment, awkwardness, being quite aware of like not being particularly covered up in some ways, and that was quite a big, yes, I felt quite awkward and embarrassed a lot through a lot of that. But I think I know it was quite like, I think getting through that and being like, this has to happen for me to be able to make the thing was quite I don't know, I feel less embarrassed and awkward about it now, because I've like got so used to, like, there was a lot of practicing and wearing the things that are in the film, like the garments and wearables, and getting used to like being in them. But I'm very glad I did it. And I also, because I was dealing with things that might be awkward or embarrassing, it felt really important to me that I would put myself in that position first before I might ask anybody else to do the same.
Perfect, thank you very much. That sounds like I kind of agree with someone who's like also made a green screen in their bedroom. I think you definitely go through, with very performative projects, I think you definitely go through a process of like getting used to being embarrassed almost. And then, you know, a question from Ellie for Natalie. Should I read it out, Ellie, or are you happy to? I'll read it.
Sorry, no, you can go for it.
Okay. What type of binding did you use to your script, Natalie? And is there a reason that you chose to present it in this way?
Yeah, so I used Coptic stitch binding, which kind of means that like you can keep adding pages to the back of it, so it's kind of like a never-ending book. So it can keep relevant with the narratives as they change.
Beautiful. Thanks very much. Gorgeous. There's a few more, so we'll ask the last few questions and then move on. Isabella, where was the scene with everyone in white and throwing flour filmed? It looked amazing.
So actually, that's quite right, that originally it was flour. So this was filmed in La Palma, one of the Canary Islands. And because I've been living there, in a sense, that's a big part of my culture. And taking my grandmother traveling there, the film is like a series of experiences. And the idea was to mix kind of her Welsh culture with kind of my adopted Canarian culture. So this, it's a bit party where they throw talcum powder about, but historically it would have been flour. It was like a boat came in with loads of ruined flour and they thought, why not? Let's just chuck it everywhere. And they wear white because it's a parody of when Canarian immigrants returned from Cuba. And so they returned with a lot of wealth. So there's a lot more kind of, history and culture there. And so it's a kind of colonial look. And now you probably saw there's a few kind of problematic moments in the film as well, with because it is like mirroring that colonialism, but it's it's also a really fun party, but rather surreal as well.
Yeah.
And the city is
Thank you
turned
very
white.
There's another question here for you from Vlad, who's asking what the underwater teddy scenes representing.
Yes, so these were they're almost representing the memories or the feeling that my grandmother has, the kind of mixing and the surrealness of the condition. So I almost imagine that she throws away her memories and they float away like teddy bears. And perhaps also there's that innocence of childhood that kind of comes back at a later stage in life when you're elderly or have some kind of condition.
Sounds very clear. Thank you very much. A question from Adina to Natalie. Why did you choose to hand bind the archive, and how has this DIY process affected your outcome?
So I chose to hand bound it because the stories that kind of in it are very personal and like organic, so I kind of wanted to translate that into how it was made. So then I developed that on further to kind of look at how other ways I could present it, which would still hold that like kind of personal aspect of it. So I ended up doing voice notes where it's like people that wrote the accounts spoke it out loud.
Perfect, thank you. And Sel's actually got a question that's quite similar. She's asking, is it important what is in the archive, or was your video more about how the archive is made physically?
Video was more about like the process of making it, because I quite like using film. But yeah, the contents of it is what's most important about the actual physical object.
Perfect. I'd say it was filmed absolutely gorgeously, and it's such a beautiful looking object. So it was really nice to see that being made. Our final question is from Vlad, who's asking Marta, this is the first time I've ever seen a microanalysis of a dad done in this manner. So what exactly gave you the idea to pursue this as a project?
So I started this project with the idea of looking at imposters and how I could become someone else. So at the beginning, I looked a lot about visually becoming somebody else until I went and talked to a method actor. And the method actor explained to me that in method acting is way more about like physically embodying the person that you're portraying. So thinking about having the same weight or moving in the similar way, it's not as much about looking. So I thought that was really interesting, and it's something I didn't thought about. So I had the idea of like trying to wait as my dad, as an idea that just popped into my brain, and I gave it a go, and it started the project in a very like kind of organic way. So yeah.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you very much. Should we move on to film group number 3?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Okay. That's in the chat now.
Is from Monty. It says, Adina, can you tell us more about the context of your project?
Yeah, sure. So I guess to summarize, maybe the description wasn't really that good. Basically what I try to do is make films with AI as the writing producer / generator for the script. And I guess it came out of me trying to challenge the way we see AI and the way we work with kind of these algorithms. So the process itself of making the films is basically putting a prompt in GPT-2, which is a language model, then seeing what comes out, and then basically making a film based on that. And also having, for example, the genre of the film generated by another algorithm and the same sort. So in the end, I guess it's this kind of mingle of a collaboration between humans and AI. And I guess this is kind of the outcome of that.
Cool, thank you. So we have some questions from Vlad. He's also said that he's going to ask the questions as he goes through the films, so you don't forget them. If anybody wants to do that, so split your screen and ask questions while you go, feel free to do that. So he's sharing some thoughts on Emily's film. He loved it, definitely an interesting topic. I actually knew about most of these. I actually used the toothbrush situation to clean my trainers too, etc. It's really interesting to see how many uses you can make out of ordinary products like a toothbrush. I'm curious, how did you feel researching toothbrushes for this long? And do you think there will be any new subcategories to toothbrushes? You've shown, for example, that the smart toothbrush exists. What do you think is next?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's different questions within that, but in terms of researching the toothbrush for as long as I did, I didn't tire as much as I thought I would, because there is just so much to understand about everyday objects and learn about them. But I did sort of become the toothbrush person, and so now, like, everything I get advertised about toothbrushes, people send me stuff about toothbrushes all the time. So I guess that's what came of researching the toothbrush for so long. In terms of subcategories, I actually, as part of the project, I wrote a list of all the things that I had discovered the toothbrush to be as. So these films aren't necessarily exhaustive, and they're just kind of like a first 5 that I did, but this list is like pages long. So you could I could very easily make films that look at it from different lenses. In terms of the smart toothbrush, it's an interesting question, because that's something that I was really interested in when I was doing my research. And I was actually in contact with a woman from the British Dental Association called Rachel Bairstow, who did an exhibition there that I went to, and I was involved with her about the toothbrush. And she actually did a discussion where they were talking about what the future is for the toothbrush. And actually, I don't know if the future of the toothbrush is AI, because it's not being so widely adopted as you might think, and there's more of a push for sustainable modes of using a toothbrush, and you see people going back to chew sticks, and so yeah.
Cool, thank you, Emily. And we've got another question for you from Isabella. She says, it's a very beautiful piece. My grandma was really engaged with Emily's toothbrush film. She was singing along to the songs and talking about her mum's dentures. It seems the visual collage sparked memories. Was this one of the intentions? Could you explain something about the intentions of your video?
Yeah, I mean, that's really nice, and I feel like not many people have seen these films yet, so part of putting them out there would be to see how people respond to them. In terms of intentions, I wanted to just sort of like play with collaging of sound and imagery together, to see if I could create narratives like through specific lenses. So for example, there was like cleaning and there was convenience. So I think a lot of it is about memory, in terms of like the whole reason that I started the project was because of an experience I had, and a lot of it like harks back to that memory. But
Cool.
it's nice to see how it did with.
Thank you. Also, this is another one for you, Emily. Did you have a personal political agenda or angle for your video, or do you see it more as an unbiased map of information? And that's from Sarah Elwen.
Yeah, well, I don't know, it's difficult. I think pretty early on, because I was exploring and mapping this web of the toothbrush, I think that one of the things I was wary of, that it was me who was collecting this and writing this list, so it was hard to keep apart my political agenda from how I was using the material. So I feel like there is elements of my personal political agenda within that, but at the same time I also wanted to play off that and see if I could make myself feel uncomfortable within the editing process of putting material together. So yeah, no, I think is the answer.
Cool, thank you. So we have some questions for Adina. This is from Vlad again. Very interesting concept. Seeing an AI talking to a person, exploring the human thoughts. Would you say that this is AI in the subconscious of the human being? For example, where is true beauty? Are you feeling sadness right now?
Yeah, so this is, I guess, in regarding to the film, where it kind of feels like it's someone's consciousness. I mean, the way that the script was generated by the algorithm kind of had this almost like philosophical pondering type of feel. But then at the same time, when I generated the genre of the film, it was kind of like a noir crime type of, I guess, feeling that I was giving it to it. So when the two came together, it kind of felt like that person sitting on the balcony was remembering a lot of these things. So yeah, I guess it could translate as AI being a subconscious or unconscious of a human being.
Cool. And the second question from Vlad is, at the beginning of the film, I felt that there was a motif with the Good Day Whispers. Is there a symbol behind that?
I don't know what to say about that, because the script itself was generated by an algorithm. So most of the, I guess, the explanations that we could have for whatever it means visually were given by me rather than by the machine. And I tried not to do that as much as possible and kind of let the machine and the way that I filmed it almost intertwine naturally rather than attaching meanings that I didn't have to something like that. So the short answer is there's not necessarily a motif that I like, an explanation that I've given to that, but I guess it's a free way for everybody to kind of interpret anything that they want from the films rather than having this particular kind of meaning.
Cool. Yeah, it's a really nice way of making films, like using AI to generate the scripts. I think it's really cool. And the last question for Adina before we move on to questions for Stan. How did you make decisions about the voice, the colours, etc. for the film? This is from Daphne.
Hi, Daphne. Yeah, so in terms of the voice that I used, there's quite a lot of text, like text to voice generators out there. This one that I use called Cereproc is one of the most natural sounding ones, and I was trying to kind of emulate as much as possible a human voice, but at the same time kind of keep that feeling that it's not actually a human, it's a robot, it's an algorithm reading out the text. But in terms of the colors and everything, I guess in the moment that I got a genre generated for me, I started looking into, for example, how a noir film should look like, or the second one was more like in the horror thriller kind of genre. So I was looking at different ways that I could portray that in a very simple way, I guess, almost like taking the stereotypes from different movie genres and attaching them to these short films.
Cool, thank you. And then Stan, we've got a question saying, a lot of the personal revelations uncovered in the workshops are quite shocking. Was that the general reaction from participants, and how did you manage to find this information about them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, that was the general response, actually. People were quite shocked, but the sort of the conceit of the workshop would explain that really. Is the workshop is run using people's personal data. So what I did to make that workshop, and all of the text boxes you can see on the left of the screen, are all coded from an app that I built to run that workshop. And that app accesses different parts of people's personal data on their own laptop live during the workshop in order to generate those questions. So it is by nature very invasive as a workshop. That's the point of it. So it was, yeah, the responses were, I ran it with people that knew what was happening with the code and people that didn't know what was happening with the code. But all round it was eerie, regardless of whether you knew how it was happening or not. So that's essentially it. Yeah, the way that I managed to get that information was by coding to access it on that person's laptop while it was happening.
Cool, thank you. And then this question is from Alfie, for you, Stan, again.
Hi, Alfie.
What was your political agenda with your workshop? What were your political intentions with your workshop?
That's tricky. My agenda, I came into it with the stance that I'm very anti-surveillance capitalism, which is essentially what the workshop's trying to create an understanding of in the participants. So I think that apps gathering data on people is the idea of if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. That's essentially what the workshop is investigating. And I came in being very sort of anti that, and the intentions from producing the workshop politically were to create an understanding, a sort of real engagement with the data that is being used to do that in the participants. So I wanted people to feel the sort of eeriness that I just spoke about when engaging with the workshop, I guess, to highlight how you should feel when you make these sort of data interactions online anyway, perhaps, if that answers that.
Cool. And then we've got a question from Monty. It says, where do you see this existing in the world? Is it a product or a workshop that people would actually use?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one, because I made the workshop in the way that it is at the moment, as quite an abstract, somewhat contrived workshop using software that I knew would work on certain people's computers, and it's not completely accessible. I couldn't just sit down with someone with the workshop in the state it is currently who I didn't know and it would run on their laptop or anything like that, because I had to create something representative in time for the Viva that we've just handed into. But the greater idea of what the workshop would be an interactive workshop that someone could sit down opposite me, and I could run this with them and give them the chance to experience this sort of engagement with their own data. And the outcome of the workshop, even in the ones that you saw in that video, was to create, I've got one here, publications, which were these sort of nice little transcripts containing all of the data that was processed during the workshop. So I guess the intention for the bigger workshop would be to generate a bespoke product for someone that gave them something to take away that's a hands-on experience of their personal data, I suppose.
Cool.
I'd really like to run it with a Google employee. That's the aim.
If anyone knows a Google employee in the comments,
please get in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, put it in the chat. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So we are now into our last section, sadly, of the night. So we've got 5 films to show you. This will be about 45 minutes long. We've got Megan Evans, Alfie Evans, Arianne Gore, Sarah Elwen, and Nye Conant. So the link should be posted in the chat very shortly. And yeah, enjoy the last segment. See you in a bit. It's been a long night, I think, but I'm glad you guys are still here. Thank you for staying. So we will start with some questions. Also, just to let you guys know, Arianne isn't here because she's in another time zone. So if you would like to leave us, so either Sophie or me, with your contact details, we can send Arianne's questions, your questions to Arianne, and then she can respond to them, and we can do that, or we can put her in contact with you, whatever you prefer. So the first question is for Megan from Vlad. What's the representations of the visuals you created? To me, it's kind of shown the journey from peacefulness to chaos. I know this also is a double meaning, since spilling the tea is about spilling drama too.
So yeah, that's kind of the point, the change from like serenity to chaos. So my project was about lying objects, and that kind of evolved through the project to like a commentary on lying and fake news. And as everything like moved online, I kind of focused to the effects of that online that we were seeing, particularly with like the pandemic and COVID-19. So I focused on the lies within that. So like the people saying on 5G pylons on fire, and like the other kind of horrendous things that happened and misleading dangers that can happen when that sort of information is spread online. Yeah, I guess that kind of answers the question.
Cool. And this is the second part of the question from Vlad. Was there any reason behind picking this scenario T for this topic, or was it an idea created by the title?
So the title came last. The team theme was from the willow pattern, which was one of the objects that I chose to investigate at the beginning of the year. So I looked at this pattern and kind of investigated it, and before lockdown I was turning objects I was investigating into confessional objects. So if I deemed them as lying or deceptive, I would then re-illustrate and remake them to make them confess and tell the truth. So I did that with the willow pattern by re-illustrating it and creating ceramics, like authentically, to put them onto. So I started making a tea set, and the tea set particularly was involved, like, because it's so entangled within the willow pattern's discourse and story. But because of COVID-19, I couldn't actually make the ceramics in the end, so I had my tea set 3D printed. But because the tea set was 3D printed, it couldn't hold hot water, so it melted, making it kind of a lying object, because materially it couldn't live up to what it presented itself as. So instead I made it a lying object by re-illustrating the pattern again, but with all the lies that I'd found around COVID-19 that was spread online, and then demonstrated like the dangers kind of effect of them by making a discursive film and melting them.
Thank you so much for that, Meg. Like, I really enjoyed seeing it melt. Like, it was just so satisfying to watch.
It was really fun to do.
Cool. Also, I was going to ask, do you have another version of the tea set? Like, the melted one wasn't the only one, was it?
I have about 6 tea pots and about 5 teacups, all at different varying stages in melting and decoration.
Right, but do you have like a whole one left?
Yeah, I have one whole one left.
Yeah. Okay, so this next question is from Ella. It says, and it's for Alfie. Alfie, your process of looking through old Argos catalogue seems so meticulous. It was really nice to see artifacts from the 70s, not just the hairdryers, but the catalogues themselves. What drew you to look at Saturday Night Fever?
So my project is on our duty to nostalgia, and essentially stemmed from acknowledging that a lot of the world around me, in particular in Western material culture, seems to be derived from nostalgia. So in particular, with me, kind of quite topically, the 70s kind of fit, but then also acknowledging that massive brands such as Gucci kind of play on marketing the 1970s through youthful dreamers to kind of trick people into buying a product or buying into a fantasy that doesn't actually exist. So Saturday Night Fever was inducted into the Library of Congress, which basically preserves films for their artistic and cultural importance. And Saturday Night Fever was one of those films, and is critically acclaimed as being kind of epitomous of the 1970s and a true reflection of it. And depending on how you watch the film and how observant you are, you can kind of gauge 2 sensations of the 1970s, like the kind of aestheticized 1970s, where it's just the glamour of dancing and disco, but then more deeply and more profoundly than that, the very racist, sexist, and just generally derogatory and earthy and horrible kind of version of the 1970s that I don't think I would necessarily want to revive. So yeah, that was kind of why I chose Saturday Night Fever. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Cool. So I have a question for Sal. Who was the guy in the video? Obviously it said his name, but I didn't have a chance to Google it. So yeah, who was the guy looking at the bikes in your video?
Completely irrelevant. Who it is. It's like
Okay.
just less stepdad, basically. Yeah, I'm a bit embarrassed because it was just like a really stupid like character development. Like it was just like a really short idea. I just filmed it in like 3 minutes. So yeah, there's no significance to the act, I'm afraid to say.
Okay. Right. So we have a few more questions for Sal in the comments, and we've got some questions for Nye, but I'll continue the questions for Sal. I can't actually read the person's name because it's not fully there, but when I find it, I'll tell you. It says, Sal, I love your movie. It made me very happy. What does it mean?
Oh,
Yeah, it's from Marta.
Thank you, Marta. That's very nice of you. Well, I was just thinking about a character who could be looking at a book with almost exactly the same photo on each page and be equally as surprised as if seeing the picture as new every time that they turned the page. I just thought that was funny. So I wanted to experiment with how that would look if it were a film. And yeah, it was very much a fast output. So yeah, it's embarrassing to be next to like Nice, for example, and everyone else who's put so much. It's like people's proper projects, and that was just a joke. So well done, everyone.
I mean, it's nice to have diversity of films, you know, not all serious things. And someone's actually said in the comments, it's from Rosa saying, love it so much, so piss myself. So yeah, it's nice. And as Rosa said, all your work isn't film. So yeah, it's just nice to see a range of outputs in this, not just like people's finished products, but, you know, some people might have submitted their Vivas, but there's a range of things. Medina says, Selwyn, and puts a love heart. That was so refreshing. The simplicity is what I love. So it's going to ruin it by asking, but I gotta know more. Please tell me you're making more. Have you bubbled up any other sketch fit ideas?
Oh, I'm going bright red. Yeah. Yes, I want to make more characters and put them together.
Cool. Can you tell us a bit about your characters that you're planning to make, or is it a secret?
I've got to practice the words before I say anything, I think, probably.
Cool. If you want to reply, just send a message in the chat. So we've got some questions for Nye. I think it's from Emma. Oh no, Emily Tonkinson Sharp says, wow, Nye, your film was so beautiful and wonderfully shot. I loved it. What are your thoughts, opinions, or relationship in regard to the Panther? Do you think he really exists?
What are my thoughts, opinions, relationship in regard to the Panther? Well, it's a weird one, really, because I've kind of become the man, and I've kind of become obsessed with the Panther. Hence why I made this film. And do I think it really exists? It's a weird one because for the whole project, I've not been thinking it can't exist because it's kind of all about, is it real, is it not? It's the mystery of it, like potentially existing is like what I find so enchanting about like this myth. I think if I saw one, it would be over. I kept on saying, like, it was a few days before like the deadline and stuff, and like handing stuff in, and I was like walking around the woods where apparently panthers have been seen. Like it's not a joke. It's not a joke. And I was walking around, I was thinking, shit, better not see a panther. But yeah, does that answer a question? Sorry.
Yeah. Just type in the comments if that answers the question. Thank you, Nye. So this one's also for you. So Rosa says, such a beautiful film. Was the man two men or a million different men, or one man, or is it a secret?
Hi, Rosa. Thank you. I've never thought of it being more than one man. I thought, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting one. Yeah, no, it is one man. But again, it's, you know, it's up to you. But yeah, I think it is one man. A sort of like isolated guy who's completely obsessed with, like absorbed into this like weird myth and like obsessed with this creature, a bit like me. But yeah, I don't know. I never thought of it being more than one man. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. And this is piggybacking off what's already been said. So if it's already been answered, you can just say so now. This is from Emma Elwen. Your film was amazing. Was it an exploration into the panther, like man living up to the myth, or more of a speculation? Kind of felt like a hybrid of the two explored through this beautiful morphing of perspectives.
I mean, you kind of answered the question right there. It is a kind of, wait, it's time to read a question yet. Oh, is it?
Do you want me to read it again?
That's okay, I've got it. I'm just, my memory's awful. Yeah, it was an exploration into the myth and the panther. but also like an exploration to this like man and how he interacted with this, with his like environment and with the countryside and the crossing all the woods and the trees, and I wanted to kind of like have it, a dabble of reality, a sort of half reality, half fiction kind of thing, because there is so much unexplainable stuff going on. Because is it real? Is it not? I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question, but again, yeah.
Cool. And Emma says, it's so playful, but also serious. Perfectly pitched. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Emma.
And then the Q&A are just questions for Arianne. Officially, this is the end of our event, but if you guys have more questions, just panelists, you can ask questions. If anybody has any questions in the comments, just let us know. Otherwise, you can go to bed.
There was one question for Meg from Medina that might be quite nice to answer, because I want to know the answer as well, if that's okay, Meg.
I think it depends on the question, but
the question is, it says, Meg, you tricked me so good. The pieces were really fine work. What's the story behind them and the process?
So as in the individual pieces of illustration, and like the process of making it?
Both, says Medina.
So I have like an iterative illustration process. I don't know if anybody saw, like, this isn't going to be helpful for anybody who wasn't in the studio, but behind my space in my desk, there was about 30, potentially maybe at its peak, different images of the same plate, different repeats with like tiny little changes. So for the illustrations, I started with the plate and then I'd change individual bits, then photocopy it and redo it and change, and then photocopy it and redo it. Because I thought, like, for me, it's like more of a hands process when I'm illustrating something, and then finally I'll go and digitally edit it afterwards. So that's kind of how I adapted the images to fit the narrative I wanted. And then the process of like creating the pots. So I designed them on Rhino, and then they get 3D printed. Then I print the transfers and then put them on, and then pour boiling water and film it disappearing. That's kind of it.
Gorgeous, thank you. I mean, they're such great objects. Cool. Unless anyone else has any questions they'd like to ask.
We have a question here, sorry, from Monty. It's for Alfie. It says, Alfie, where do you see your project going?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So on the Hey Look website, I've kind of started developing my project a bit further, or considering that already. The bulk of it before the Viva was mainly developing like this methodology and trying to consider what our duty to nostalgia is. But now, like, kind of post that, and where I stand with it now is, I feel like what you can do with nostalgia in a design process, rather than kind of like using it or upcycling it for like an aesthetic design purpose, you can kind of derive a political framework from your nostalgia to be able to design new narratives and fictions that can aid the development of culture. Sorry, my head is like totally hazy. I'm so tired.
No worries, it's been long.
Yeah. But yeah, like I did this weird kind of childish collage. It's starting to talk about it, where it was basically situating the political framework of Saturday Night Fever within a more contemporary context, which is kind of off the back of the prospective developments in SpaceX, with them starting to consider like how we're going to colonize new planets with humans, or like go on these crazy adventures and voyages out into space. But trying to consider like who should be the people that you utilize or use to initiate colonizing a planet based on like the framework of Saturday Night Fever, because there's quite a few different groups of people held within the framework of it that would probably have very interesting discourses that you would want to question if you'd want them at the start of a new civilization, if the aim was to develop a utopia. So I suppose like where this is going is basically developing a performance of some sort, whether that's like theatrical or film based, to firstly address this thing of Western culture being very nostalgic and aestheticized, and trying to further cultural development through a narrative and performance that's collaborative with other designers, makers, artists, whoever. Then in part to that also, this secondary part, which is a performance kind of discussing the nostalgic political themes that are quite questionable from Saturday Night Fever, to talk about how we move forward from that with these prospective ideologies around space utopias and colonizing Mars and stuff.
Cool. Thank you.
Too arbitrary.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, yeah, I just want to thank everyone who's still here for joining us tonight, because if you guys weren't here and didn't make these amazing films, then we couldn't have had an event. So thank you so much. Thank you for all the attendees who are still here. It just makes me happy just to see like numbers and that people are still here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We hope you've enjoyed the films. A recording of this event, as I keep saying, will be available with closed captions on the YouTube BA Design channel. For 48 hours, so you can rewatch your favorites, or you can show them to friends and family who couldn't make it or would be interested in the films. Check out our website, so heylooksomethingisHappening.com, our Instagram as well, at heylooksomethingisHappening. If you want to get in touch with us, the website or the Instagram is the way to do it. Thank you guys so much for coming and making it a success. Well done for all your hard work. Yeah, thank you all attendees, you lovely attendees. Good night and sleep well.
Cool.
Also,
thank you, everyone.
We have a Happenings event tomorrow at 1 p.m. BST, so don't forget to tune in if you can make it. Please do, because it's going to be great.
Yeah.
All
and
right.
Hannah's doing a workshop, so definitely go.
All right. Cool. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Cool. Bye.
Good night.
Oh, and yeah, thank you everyone for coming and staying with Vlad, another student from a different uni. Thank you, Rosa, Stan, everyone in the comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.